John and Esther and their three children appear to have a good life. They live in a 4-bedroom home with 2 bathrooms on 3 acres of land in a rural area. 1 acre is fenced in with a pasture for their horse and a pond that John stocks some fish in, and the children go swimming there in the summer on the hot days. John works on a construction crew. He has an above-average income. Esther does some baking and raises some vegetables, has a little roadside stand out by the road in front of their house that she sells her wares in. They don't really need the income, but it keeps her busy and helps them to be able to work together as a family to do something. Her customer base has grown over the years. The children are growing. They're doing well in school. They have some friends from the local Christian school that they enjoy being with. The family's part of an Anabaptist church about a 10-minute drive from their house. They attend Sunday morning services and the monthly evening services. On the surface, it looks like they have the ideal life. But if you look into the hearts and the thoughts of John and Esther, you would learn that actually they're not happy. They're exhausted and they're lonely. They've acquired everything that they thought would bring happiness, but it eludes them. And at times, they feel like they're on a treadmill that never stops. They run as fast as they can, but they never catch up. They're also concerned about their 18-year-old son, who doesn't engage in church youth activities, spends, in their opinion, way too much time following professional sports. He works for a local contractor, but he really shows very little interest in church activities or the matters of faith that are really important to John and Esther. John leaves the house every morning about 5:30 so that he can be at work at 6 o'clock. Esther gets the children up by 7, has them to school by 8 o'clock. She's busy baking and attending her vegetable stand most of the day. She picks up the children in the afternoon. John comes home from work about 6 p.m. After supper, the family goes to an event or does chores on their property. And by 9 o'clock, John and Esther are trying to get their children to bed. When the day's over and John and Esther fall into bed, they're exhausted and wonder if they'll have energy to do this another day. There's been some conflicts at the church, and John and Esther have friends on both sides of the conflict, so they've withdrawn some from church activities because of the stress of relationships at church. Sometimes Esther feels like she doesn't even know her husband. John feels alone, is too busy to think much about their lives. They don't seem to have time to talk. They haven't had friends over to their house for several months because they and everybody they know is just too busy for informal social activities. As a result of this, John and Esther are dealing with profound loneliness. They've lived at their current location for over 5 years, and after 250 weeks of being way too busy, they're beginning to despair of things ever changing. They're exhausted, they're weary, they keep thinking they need to invest more in relationships in the church and community, but every week is so busy that it gets put off for another week. One evening, Esther asked John, "How did life get to be this way? Why don't we have close friends and good spiritual peer relationships for our children? What can we do to have the kind of close community that it seemed like our grandparents and our parents had? What's going to happen to our children? Will they even be committed to the faith that we've lived by?" And John didn't have any answers to her questions. It troubled him that he didn't have any answers to her questions. It did seem like they were living on the fringe of the Brotherhood community. They had concerns about their children and the lack of positive spiritual relationships. And the world they lived in was undoubtedly very different from the world of their parents and grandparents. And yet, it seemed like there ought to be some way to maintain brotherhood and to maintain relationships within the church. And one evening, John sat down with Esther and they began to brainstorm ways to intentionally connect with other people and to deepen their commitment to relationships in the Brotherhood. They talked about how the culture around them has become very individualized. And they knew the church was valiantly trying to develop connections, but everybody's lives were as hectic as John and Esther's were. And they realized they really can't wait for the church to do something. They need to do something themselves. And they began to make some plans about how they could strengthen relationships within the Brotherhood. The Brotherhood is very important. These verses are the basis of our thoughts this evening about the Brotherhood. Brethren, if a man is overtaken in any trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such an one in a spirit of gentleness, considering yourself, lest you also be tempted. Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. Galatians 6:1-2. 1 Peter 2:17, honor all people, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the king. You know, individualism is the atmosphere in which we live. It's the air that we breathe. It's our society in which we live. Some of it is in the United States in the founding documents, saying that we have the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And we've kind of taken that to the extreme to where it's become absurd. I've watched just societal trends, and one of the things that, as I've traveled, of course I was born in Pennsylvania, raised in Pennsylvania, and as we've traveled back to Pennsylvania, I've observed the Welcome to Pennsylvania sign and the tourist slogan that is on the Welcome to Pennsylvania sign. When I was growing up, the slogan was the Keystone State. And the Keystone State kind of implies that we're in relationship with other states. We're the most important one because we're the keystone, but there are other states, and we're in relation with those states. And so it kind of implied relationship. At some point, I came into Pennsylvania, and I saw that the sign now said the state of independence. And I thought, well, that's an interesting shift in tone, in thought. And then a little later, when I come into Pennsylvania, I noticed that the sign said, pursue your happiness. Well, that's another shift in what's important and values. And this year, when I came into Pennsylvania, I saw that the sign said, the Great American Getaway. And I thought, isn't that interesting? Like, why isn't it the Great American Get Together? But we have this thought that if I could just get away from everybody and just be alone, everything would be great, right? My problem is other people, and I just need to be alone. But the reality is, no, I need to be together with other people. You see, we could have each taken 2 days of solitude, gone to Idaho, and just, spent 2 days alone. But it wouldn't have had the same, and I'm all for solitude, don't get me wrong, but it wouldn't have had the same effect as getting together and having this exchange of ideas and the conversations that you have here. And there are things that happen in the context of relationship and in the context of brotherhood that will never happen in solitude. And so we really need both. But if we're going to focus on solitude, if we're each going to live our lives individually in isolation, we're never going to grow. We're not going to be able to use the variety and the diversity of gifts for the edification of the body. And we have to recognize that society has changed, and the role of the pastor in the church has changed in the last 100 years. At least where I grew up 100 years ago, most of the people in the church were involved in agriculture. Most of the people in the church lived within a very small radius of the church. They saw each other throughout the week, and church was just an extension of the community. And so if someone was struggling, if there was something that happened, people from the church lived close to them, and everybody was there. And so the pastor was involved, but today the fact of the matter is, many times, probably for most of us, most of the people that you see at church on Sunday morning, you never see any other time during the week. And so people are struggling with issues and relationship challenges and marriage difficulties and pain in their lives without anyone knowing what's happening in their lives. And then you get called as a pastor. And the load of what you have, of the relational load that you have, is quite different from the relational load that a pastor carried 100 years ago. We can lament the changes, but we are not going to go back to an agriculturally based occupational community where everyone lives within 10 miles of the church. We have to figure out how to do brotherhood in the world in which we live. Some of the thoughts that I'm sharing, much of what I'm sharing with you this evening, comes from a viewpoint paper that I was part of writing, a part of a writing group that was writing a viewpoint paper on cultivating committed community, which is going to be published sometime this year. But as we were writing that paper, I was talking to an Amish minister friend of mine about community and about brotherhood, and he said, well, Merle, in a church-driving church, you are never going to have the level of community that we have in a horse-driving church. You just can't do it. I would like to prove him wrong. I'm not going to accept that. So I'm kind of on a crusade to prove that in a church-driving church, a car-driving church, you can have a real deep level of brotherhood and community. But we're going to have to be intentional about it. It's not going to happen by accident. It's not going to happen without some effort and some intentional work to develop community. And I know that many of you as pastors, you want to build brotherhood and you try. But if you schedule something, everybody's too busy, can't come. So then you have activities and people don't come. And I know it's challenging. And I don't have all the answers, but I do know that we need to work on building community. And I'm going to suggest to you 8 habits of effective brotherhood builders. And again, these come from that viewpoint paper that will be published later this year. The first one is accept personal responsibility. Individualism is driven by a focus on personal rights. Community is cultivated by a focus on personal responsibility. So I'm not looking at what my rights are. I'm looking at what I'm responsible to do. So I'm not going to wait for the church to solve the problem. I'm going to see what I can do in my relationships to take responsibility for my life and for the kind of relationships that I want, and I'm going to build that into my life. So I'm not going to wait for others. You see, there are people who, they go to church and they say, well, nobody talks to me. I go and I'm just, I don't have any relationships, and nobody reaches out to me. Nobody ever texts me. Nobody ever calls me. But neither do they text anyone. Neither do they call anyone. Neither do they talk to anyone. And so we need to take the actions that we would like to see happen and take responsibility for them and actually be the change that we want to see in the brotherhood. Secondly, we cultivate godly character and patterns of relating. As we were working on this paper, I did an online survey of I just asked people to send me, what are the characteristics of people that build community? And these are some of the responses I got. One was humility. That there's just that overriding sense of humility that and Scripture tells us, 1 Peter tells us, clothe yourselves, all of you, with humility toward one another, for God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Humility positions us to learn from and receive help from others in our community. You see, when we have a sense of self-sufficiency, and one of the challenges that we have is that our affluence makes it possible for us to live isolated lives and for us to take care of our own needs. We don't need to depend on others because we can go buy what we need, we can have what we need, we can take care of, we don't need to share equipment and those kinds of things anymore. We can take care of ourselves, but to have the humility to say, I'm willing to be needy. I'm willing to admit that I need something from you, and to ask. It may just be as simple as asking advice. Like, here's something that I'm dealing with in my life, and do you have anything to say to me about that? Do you have any advice for me? And just seeking out input from other people, and then selflessness. Scripture says, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only in his own interests, but also on the interests of others. Being self-centered or being other-centered is the natural outworking of humility and leads us to serving those around us. The real secret is that most of us spend most of our time thinking about ourselves and thinking about how other people are seeing me and what other people are thinking about me. We're not thinking about, we don't tend to spend a lot of time thinking about other people. The day before we left to come here, we drove down here yesterday, and that was Thursday, right? And Wednesday, our hot water heater quit. And so we had no hot water. So I told Edith, well, we're going to shower at the hotel when we get here. Forget our hot water heater. We'll worry about that when we get home. So we left home yesterday morning without a shower. And so we're here at the hotel. And she said, well, we'll get a shower tomorrow morning. And so we're getting ready to come down and saying, but I wonder what people are going to think about my hair and the way it looks. And she said, nobody's going to even think about you. They're all be thinking about their own hair. And that's true. None of you said, your hair looks a little greasy. Nobody said anything to me about it. And so that selflessness, that willingness to think about others and not to be thinking about myself, but to be focused on others, and just the whole question of how can I help? Is there anything I can do for you? Is so profound and yet so simple. And then listening. James 1 verse 19 says, know this, my beloved brothers, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. When we cultivate focused, active listening, we honor other people in our community, and we demonstrate value for them. I don't know about you, but sometimes my mouth gets ahead of my brain, and I'm saying things that I haven't thought through, and it doesn't usually turn out very well. One time I was traveling, and I had a series of meetings in different cities, and I had a meeting in Southern Ontario, and then I was flying from Toronto to Cleveland. Had a meeting the next day in Ohio. I got to the airport, and the guy at the ticket counter said, your ticket is for tomorrow. I said, no, it's not. It's for today, like I'm going today. And he said, no, it's for tomorrow. Look at the date. I looked at it. You're right. It is for tomorrow. Well, I said, I never wanted to travel tomorrow. I always wanted to go today. And does that flight go today? And he said, yeah, it does. And I said, well, can you put me on that flight? He said, well, I can't, but you can go to customer service. I said, oh, come on, are there seats on the flight? And he said, yeah, there's seats on the flight. And I said, well, just put me on standby or something. He said, I can't do it. Go to customer service. So I went to customer service. The lady at customer service said, yeah, the flight goes today and there's seats available, but because you're changing your ticket, you're going to have to pay a $125 change fee. And I said, no, come on. I don't know what happened, but I never wanted to travel tomorrow. I always wanted to travel today. And I don't know what went wrong. And it's not like I wanted to travel tomorrow. Now I'm coming in and changing it. It's just, so help me out a little bit. Come on, surely you can waive that fee. And she's like, no. And I said, well, can I talk to your supervisor? And she said, no, you can't talk to my supervisor. And I said, listen, lady, like, you are not the CEO of Air Canada. And I know enough about organizations that in every company and organization has policies, but somewhere in the organization, there's a person who can make an exception to that policy. And that's the person I want to talk to. And she said, no, you're not talking to anybody except me. She said, Air Canada hired me to do this job, and they gave me the job, and I'm doing my job, and you're not talking to anybody else. So I'm thinking, well, I could rent a car. I'm thinking, but that's not going to. So finally, I gave up, and I said, okay, you got me. I'm going to have to pay the fee, I guess. But I wasn't very happy. And so then she was happy. So she gets my ticket all ready, and then she said, okay, and how will you be paying for this? And that's when my mouth got ahead of my brain, and I said, well, very grudgingly. And then she was mad, and I was happy. And it felt really good in the moment, right? Well, she gave me my boarding pass, and I got out to the airplane, and it had 2 seats on one side of the aisle, 1 seat on the other side, so there's 3 seats in every row, and there's like 20 rows, and there were 2 other people on the plane, and my seat was all the way at the back. Against the baggage, it didn't recline, and there was no window. So I'm sitting there, and the flight attendant came back and said, what are you doing back here? And I said, well, let's just say that I had a run-in with the customer service agent, and she got the last word. And she sat me in the corner, and she said, well, you don't have to sit here. You can sit wherever you want. I said, no, I deserved it, and I'm feeling kind of sorry for myself. I think I'll just sit back here and have a pity party all the way to Cleveland. So, but you see, thinking, listening, being others-centered, not thinking about ourselves, but being willing to hear what other people are saying. I could have been much more respectful to that lady. She was doing her job. But I'm thinking about myself and what I want, right? And anyway, listening, encouraging. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 11 says, therefore encourage one another and build one another up, just as you are doing. So harsh criticism might be more memorable and might affect change, at least in the short term, but cultivating a pattern of encouraging words promotes long-term change because people respond to compliments. Think about it. The things that you're good at doing, you're probably good at doing because somebody complimented you and told you you do that really well. My wife is an artist. One of the reasons she developed her art ability was that she had an aunt who, when she would come to visit, would say, show me what you're drawing. And she would show an interest in her artwork. Well, she drew more things, and she got better at drawing because she wanted that affirmation from her aunt. I'm a storyteller. I became a storyteller because as I was growing up, we had some pretty boring jobs. Those of you that are my age remember shelling peas and doing the stuff, that took hours and hours, and you're just sitting there. It's a mindless task, and when we would do that, my siblings would say, Merle, tell us a story. And so I'd tell them some kind of story, I don't know. But I got affirmation from that. And so compliments, you see, you get probably more long-term change in behavior by complimenting people on the things they're doing right than criticizing people for the things they're doing wrong. And I just think that focus is important. Number 3, focus on family and home. We build community by building families, building strong families, and encouraging families, because family is where brotherhood is learned and where it happens. And it's the foundation of brotherhood within the church community. And so encourage people to adjust vocational priorities and hobbies, to develop children into healthy productive contributors. If we don't do that, someone will. And it's important that we do that. And then to foster and be intentional about intergenerational relationships. A couple of years ago, I was at a family get-together, and one of my brother-in-laws asked me, he said, Merle, when you were an adolescent or a young teenager, were there any adult men that you knew, noticed you, and knew that you existed? And I said, yeah, there were. And he said, I knew it. He said, I had none. He said, there was one uncle that I thought, well, maybe he notices me, but he said, I had no one. And so I started asking, I've started asking men that question. When you were late in your adolescence or early teens, were there any adult men that took an interest in you? And you know what? There's too many men who say no. I didn't have that. That's a tragedy, and that's going to be devastating to our community to not have that kind of connection. One of the men who took an interest in me, my father had a business, and from the time I was about 13, in the summers I would work in the business. It was a concrete business, and there was a cement salesman, Sam, who would come to that business to sell my dad's cement. And he came every week, and he'd go into the office and sell my dad's cement, and then he'd come out in the plant, and he'd find me. And he took an interest in me, and he kind of liked me for some reason. And I don't know, he was 50, and I was 15. And he'd talk to me, and he'd take me to the break room and buy me a Mountain Dew. And he thought I was an underprivileged kid, and so because my dad wouldn't take me to sports events, so he'd take me to Philadelphia to the baseball games and Hershey to the hockey games. And I knew he didn't have to do that to sell cement. I knew he liked me, and I really valued that relationship. One summer I was driving front-end loader, and there was a problem with the steering, and I had been talking to the shop foreman about fixing it, but he hadn't gotten anything done. So I was driving one day, and the steering wheel spun around. There was a knob on the steering wheel, and it hit me on my crazy bone, and I kind of know how that feels. And I jumped off of that front-end loader, and I went into the shop. I found the shop foreman. I told him what I thought about his ability to schedule things in the shop and fix things, and I just really told him how it was. And then I was really angry. And then I turned around to walk out of the shop, and there was Sam standing in the doorway. And when I got to the door, Sam took me by the arm. He walked me around the side of the building, backed me up against the wall, and then he leaned over me, and my eye level was at his tie. I could still tell you what it looked like. And he told me that if I was ever going to be the kind of person that he had thought I was going to be when I grew up, I had a lot to learn about how to deal with problems and how to relate to people. And he said, what you did was wrong. And what you're going to do now is you're going to go back in the shop, you're going to find that shop foreman, you're going to apologize for what you just said to him, and you're going to tell him that you are willing to drive that front-end loader as long as you need to the way it is, and if he ever gets it in the shop to fix it, you're going to say thank you. And he said, I'm going with you. So we went back in the shop. Sam stood there. I told the shop foreman what Sam told me to say, and then we went to the break room, and he bought me a Mountain Dew, and life went on. Well, you see, I hadn't seen Sam. Like he could have said, well, Merle, he's just not going to be the kind of person I thought he was going to be. But he cared enough about me to take me around the corner and tell me that what I had done was wrong, and this is how you fix it, and I'm going with you. We need that kind of intergenerational input if we're going to produce functional, productive adult men who actually know how to do relationships and how to deal with challenges in relationships. And we have to be intentional about tuning in to the young men that are in our congregations, that are in our brotherhoods. Last weekend at our church, the ladies had a one-day ladies retreat. So the men are all at home with the children, right? So we decided we're all going to go to the school and have a party at the school. So we ordered pizza, and so we have like 12 men and 40 children, and we're all, we're going to go to the school and do our thing. And so I walked in, and when I walked in the door, there was a table of 5 adolescent boys. And when I walked in, they said, "Hey, Merle, come and play Citadel with us." And I was like, "Oh, okay." They said, "Please." And so "Yeah, sure, I'll do it." So I had the greatest time playing Citadel with 5 adolescent boys. And it just really meant something to me that when I walked in the door, they're saying, "Hey, Merle, come play Citadel with us." It's like, that's amazing. Like I would do anything to be able to have the confidence that of those young boys that I'm actually interested in playing a game with them. And the things that happen relationally just around a table like that over a game for an hour, it's powerful. And we need to be intentional about intergenerational relationships. 4 is develop strong relational patterns. Linger over food and fellowship. Our lives are way too busy. We live in way too fast-paced of a society. Someone said that the United States is the only country in the world that actually has a mountain called Mount Rushmore. And it's just like we are so busy. Like, think about it. When's the last time that you ask somebody, like, "How are things going? Are you busy?" And they said, "Not really. No, it's pretty good. We're managing." Try that sometime. Next time somebody asks you, "Are you busy?" Say, "No, not really." And see what kind of response you get. Like, it's going to be the most awkward conversation from there on, right? Because we're conditioned to say, "Oh, it's crazy. You wouldn't believe." I saw, "Oh man, it's unbelievable." And maybe it isn't even, right? But we feel pressure to be busy. Why? Slow down. Let's just take it down a notch. And this starts in your home. Like, it starts around your meal times at home. There's something about eating together that is really, really powerful. Think about some of Jesus' conversations. He's sitting with a Pharisee, and while they're eating, he's saying, "You know what, Simon, I got something to say to you." But it was in the context of a meal together. And eating together is a bonding experience. Some of the most powerful moments that we have with our children are over meal times and bedtimes. And yet, we can rush through meal times. And then someone said, it's so unfair that the people who want to sleep have to put to bed the people who don't want to sleep. But it's true, right? Like, it's, but we can just, by that time of the day, we're just so stressed, and it's just like, please just go to sleep. Like, just get in bed already, and I need another drink. But I think some of that second and third and fourth drinks are a cry for relationship. And I just think some moments, just taking some time and gearing ourselves up and say, okay, I'm going to take 15 minutes here, and I'm really we're going to make this a quality bedtime. There's some powerful moments there. Practice hospitality. Invite people into your home. Develop inclusivity. Think about church fellowship meals. Who are the people that nobody tends to sit with? And I know we have our friends, and we're just looking for, okay, we're going to have this fellowship meal, and we're going to sit with this. But there's often people on the fringes that nobody really reaches out to them. And can we seek out those people? Can we draw them into the experience? We can have some great conversations with people that we don't normally talk to, people that we don't normally interact with. We can learn things about them and their life experience by drawing them out and actually sitting with them, having a conversation. with those that others don't gravitate to? Who's being missed? Who's being overlooked? And to prioritize in-person interactions. Maybe we can call a neighbor or go see somebody rather than Googling on YouTube how to do something, and actually have a conversation with somebody about, hey, you know how to do that. Can you tell me how to change the light bulb in my car, or whatever it is. Today we can get everything on YouTube, but rather than looking for a YouTube video, maybe you're looking for a friend who knows how to do that, and give somebody the opportunity to serve you and to actually need somebody and to actually put yourself in a position of being served by someone who has knowledge or experience that you don't have. And then give deference to the church community. Put the community's priorities and needs over your own. And speak of we and us rather than they and them. I had one pastor that told me that he goes to the church leadership team meeting, and his wife knows some of the agenda items, like she knows kind of what they're going to be talking about. And so he said he comes home and her first question is, well, what did they decide? And he said he intentionally says, we decided, because it's not them, it's us. And just changing our language. We can talk about church and we can say, well, they do this and they don't do that. But maybe it's we don't do that, or we do that, and talking about us and we rather than they and them. Volunteering for thankless tasks, meeting with someone from the Brotherhood monthly over coffee and or whatever your beverage of choice is if you don't drink coffee. But one of the things we did in the church in Sioux Lookout, now I know we had a small church, and I know that many of you have many more people than what we had in the church in Sioux Lookout, but you take your car in for a checkup on a regular basis, or you should. If you don't, you're going to run into problems eventually. But what about a spiritual checkup? And so what we did as pastors is we made a list, and we made sure that every man in the congregation got a spiritual checkup once a year, and that we had an in-depth conversation about where they were at, the issues in their lives. And you know what? Some of those spiritual checkups led to a series of ongoing conversations about things that were happening in their lives. And I just want to tell you something. Being a pastor is an amazing role. It is. When you're a pastor, you have the trust. People will talk to you as a pastor. They will tell you things they haven't even told their spouse because you're the pastor. Treasure that role. Utilize it. Take advantage of it. Give people the opportunity to talk to you. Spend time with them. Delve into what's happening in their lives. Talk to them. It's part of building community. And then working together. Doing work projects together, especially as men. We often talk more when our hands are busy. If we're just sitting talking, we don't know what to do with our hands. But if we're working together, we'll talk about things. At our church now there in New Hamburg, we were talking about our men's Bible study for the next year, and one of the men was saying, well, let's do work projects instead of a Bible study. So this coming year we have a monthly men's Bible study, but 3 of those months we're going to find somebody that needs a deck built or something, and we're going to do a work project together. Establish and encourage geographic roots. Don't live in your community with one foot in the door. Invest heavily. Build. I know today we live in a very mobile society, but put down roots. Build roots and encourage geographic roots. establish or pursue true spiritual community. You know, you can practice all of these things and kind of do it in a secular way. But what we're really looking for is deep spiritual connections. And the purpose of all of this is to use the Brotherhood to reach the world. Because it's not that we're going to have this really amazing brotherhood and we're just going to really love each other and this is going to be really beautiful. It's like God said to Abraham, I'm going to bless you, and through you I'm going to bless all the peoples of the world. God is going to bless us as brotherhood so that we can bless the world and so that we can demonstrate what true community looks like, and that there are actually people who love each other. Our world is driven by anger and by fear, but those are not the driving forces of the church. The driving forces of the church, the Apostle Paul said, he's given us not a spirit of fear, but a spirit, but power and love and a sound mind. And so our driving forces are love and a confidence in the sovereignty of God. And so we're neither angry or afraid. We're living, and isn't that an amazing thing in our world today, to have a group of people who aren't scared and a group of people who aren't angry? Like, that's attractive, right? Anger is a separating emotion. It's a divisive emotion. But when we really do community well and we love each other, and then we make that invitational and say, this is for you. It's not just something for us, but you can be part of this. And brotherhood, I really believe, my last point there, brotherhood is what helps to alleviate poverty and loneliness and addictions. It helps to alleviate poverty because when you're in community, you know that you have people. If something bad happens, people are going to rally around and help you out. I doubt if there's any person here who's thinking, you know, if I get a phone call that my house has burned down while I'm here in Pittsburgh and something went wrong and somebody drained my bank account and my bank locked my credit card, I'm going to wind up living under a bridge in Pittsburgh because, it's all going to be lost. No, even if all those things happen to you, all you'd have to do is tell Lonnie or Mark, and man, you'd be so flooded with cash and place to live and food. You wouldn't even be able to eat all the food that people would bring you, right? Because you're part of a community. But if you're not part of a community, even what would be a minor inconvenience for somebody that is in a community becomes a disaster for a person who isn't in community. So the alleviation of poverty happens through the development of community. I serve as staff pastor for Open Hands. I was in an Open Hands savings group a number of years ago in Haiti, and I knew these people in Haiti because we had lived there, and I knew people who were in the group. And I knew that many of them were recipients of charity over the years. And as I sat there in that group, I knew the treasurer of the group. And that lady said to me, she said, Pastor Merle, there's nobody in our group that takes charity from anybody outside of our group because we take care of each other. That's community. That's what happens when people care for each other. And by the way, there's an Open Hands table out here. You can stop by there and look at it. But poverty is alleviated by community. Loneliness is alleviated by community. Addiction is alleviated by community. You think about it, people who are in addiction have their own community. And if a person is going to break out of addiction, they're going to lose their community, right? When we lived in Sioux Lookout for about 10 years up to COVID, we did a meal on Sunday afternoons for the street people. Our goal was to build relationships with the homeless population in Sioux Lookout because we didn't have any opportunity to do that otherwise. One day I was sitting at the table, and one of the men there said to me, "You are the only friend I have who doesn't drink." And I thought, you know what? right there. That's the problem. He has no friends who do not drink. Most of the people I know who live my kind of lifestyle don't have any friends who do drink. So here we are living in the same town with no interaction. So if that person is going to break out of that addicted community, he's going to need a whole new set of friends. And that's where community becomes the invitation. You see, when Jesus came, he said to the people, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. The message we have for the world is repent, because the kingdom is here and we're the representatives and you can be part of it. It's for you. And we have this amazing thing going, and you can come and we'll welcome you with open arms. So let's do Brotherhood intentionally, and let's do it well, and invite the world to be part of what God is doing. May God bless you as you do that.